So if you lived in ancient Bible times, odds are you lived under the authority of a king.
And many of these kings claimed that they were gods, and they would even call themselves the image of God.
Meaning they had authority to tell people what to do, order things to be made.
Yeah, they got to define good and evil. And these kings would often make statues of themselves, which in Hebrew were called tselem, often translated as idol or image.
But for Israel, they didn't view their kings as the God. In fact, they were never supposed to even make images of God.
It's exactly right, and that was really unique for that time and culture. This is rooted, first of all, in Israel's belief that you can't reduce the creator God down to any one thing in creation. But there's another reason. People aren't to make images of God because God has already made images of himself.
When did he do that?
Well, let's go to page 1 of the Bible. And the first person we meet there is God. He's the one with authority over all creation. He speaks and creation obeys, and he defines what is good and not good. In other words, he alone is king. But then surprisingly, as the pinnacle of all of God's creative work, he makes humans, and he calls all of them the image of God.
So he gives all humans the authority to rule.
Exactly, that's what he goes on to say. He tells the humans to subdue the earth and to rule it. And so this task that once belonged only to elite kings is here in the Bible the task of every human being. This was a revolutionary statement in its day because all humans are being called to rule and to participate in the human project.
So what does this mean? I mean, how are we all supposed to rule?
So the picture we get in Genesis is gardening.
Gardening?
Yes, gardening. So they rule the earth by cultivating it, by harnessing all of the earth's raw potential and then making something more and new out of it.
So growing food for each other.
Yes, but that also includes growing families then, which become neighborhoods, and then they create communities where people are going to work and take care of each other and build businesses and cities that will expand to new places and so on.
So ruling is really the day-to-day acts of our work and creativity.
Yes, we take the world somewhere. This is humanity's divine and sacred task.
Yeah, and this all sounds really nice. And humans have designed some pretty great things. But just as often we create things that cause a lot of suffering and a lot of injustice, so maybe we shouldn't actually be ruling.
Yeah, so the Bible addresses this. In Genesis, what happens is that God gives humans a choice about how they're going to rule. So are they going to use their authority for the benefit of others, which is God's definition of good, or are they going to turn away and define good and evil for themselves and use their authority for self-advantage?
And in the story, they choose to define good and evil on their own terms.
And so this is the Bible's depiction of the human condition. So sometimes we pull off amazingly good stuff, but just as often, despite our best intentions, we act selfishly and we create evil in the world.
And so we're stuck as mediocre rulers making a mess of things.
But that's not the end of the story. So the Bible goes on and it makes this claim that all of this was resolved when God bound himself to humanity through Jesus. And he showed us what it looks like to truly rule as a human.
So what does it look like?
Well, Jesus ruled by serving and by seeking the best for others, by putting himself underneath them and loving not just his friends, but also his enemies.
And that's not a typical way to rule.
And not only that, Jesus confronted the consequences of all of the evil and the death that we have created by our messed up ways of ruling. And he takes it. I mean, he lets it kill him. And so when the New Testament writers looked back to Jesus' resurrection, they see a whole new future opening up for all humanity.
Jesus is a new way to be human.
Yeah, that's why they called Jesus the image of God, or the new human. And not only that, they also believe that Jesus' divine life and power is now available to heal and to transform us to become our life and power.
And this sounds really nice, but what does it really look like?
So practically, the Apostle Paul said it looks like people being filled by Jesus' own presence and spirit. filled with love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness and integrity and gentleness and self-control. He says this is the new humanity that God wants to create in us, so that we become people in whom God's image is being restored, people who will move the human project forward. And that's actually how the story of the Bible ends. It's a renewed world where God is on his throne and his servants are all around him, but they're the ones ruling over this new world, taking it into new, uncharted territory with Jesus as their healer and their guide.
How I may attain the resurrection from the dead. Not that I have already obtained this or have already reached the goal, but I press on to make it my own. Because Christ Jesus has made me his own. I do not consider that I yet have made it my own. But this one thing I do, forgetting what lies behind and straining forward to what lies ahead, I press on toward the goal, for the prize of the heavenly call of God in Christ Jesus. Jesus, we want to know you. We want to experience the power of your resurrection. And harder to say, harder to mean, we want to experience the sharing of your sufferings by becoming like you in your death, if that is the means by which we attain the resurrection power. Not that we have already obtained any of this or have already reached that goal, but we continue to press on to make that goal ours. Because you, Jesus, through your life and death, made us a part of you. We don't consider that we've made it our own, but this one thing we are determined to do together. Forgetting what is behind and leaning into what is ahead, we press on toward the goal for the prize of the heavenly call of God in Christ Jesus. Jesus, make us mature like this. Help us to think this way and to live this way. We want to know you. Amen. Any thoughts or anything come to you tonight? Anything different from last week, or you always get to do this? Did Paul say in this verse he wanted to suffer like Jesus and experience crucifixion, self-sacrificing love? He didn't. He said, I want to attain resurrection power. And he seems to think that the path to that is what? Through the cross. The power of the resurrection comes through the power of dying, you know. And that goes back to what Paul says in Galatians that we looked at. I'm crucified with Christ. Nevertheless, I live. Nevertheless, I've experienced resurrection. And I continue to experience resurrection. And one day I'm going to experience resurrection times a billion, you know, times a lot more. One of the key things in this verse to me that he says, I'm not there yet. This guy is sitting in a prison for the sake of Jesus, and he's not sure completely he's going to get out. And he says, I'm not there yet, but I still continue to go forward, forgetting what is behind. And in his case, in this chapter, he's already talked about what was behind. What was behind for him was a lot of accomplishment and a lot of pats on the back and a lot of accolades. And he was a VIP in the Jewish faith. Forgetting all that, you know. But I think forgetting all that could also mean all the junk back here too. I'm nobody, I'm nothing, I'm awful, I'm terrible. That could be forgetting, you know, what is behind. And probably the truth is in all of our cases, it's a little bit of both, you know. But Paul's making a point here about people who are trying to say that the sign on your body or the accomplishments that you have are what make you in Christ. And he says, no. What takes you to the center of what Christ is all about, and that's life, is death. That's what takes you to the center of it. And so, yeah, one of the things we're doing in this class is why does Paul keep talking about that to these church communities? Why is his message to them? These two passages that we've looked at, Galatians 2, Philippians 3, are just one of several where he says, yeah, folks, it's all about death. And he's writing to church communities who have specific problems. And he seems to think that's a core part of the teaching that needs to come out, is that, yeah, it's about a death to that. It's not that he was fixated on this. It's just that this is where all of our problems start, is that me is still alive. Well, what do you mean by that? And I think Paul would say, let's turn back to Genesis 1, which is what we're about to do. I think in his mind, the story, the mission that he was on, that he was joining God in, he says, I can't tell the story without taking us all the way back to Genesis 1. So that's why we're doing this. We're going back to Genesis 1. And here's our goal for this week and next week. We want to look at Genesis 1 and 2. Probably, and here's how I'm going to do it for time's sake. Genesis 1, I'm not going to read word for word. Okay? Genesis 2, we are going to read word for word when we get there. We're not quite as familiar with that. We are more familiar with, and God said, let there be light. And God divided this and that, and it was good, and there's this rhythm, and there's all that. We're more familiar with that. And I do want to point out a few things from that, but we're going to look at Genesis 1 and 2, and we're trying to create together, what is the picture? This is God's dream. And by the end of chapter 2, he's done. He's finished. Spoiler alert, it's all over. This is it. This is what I made. And this is what it... This was my dream and my vision. And it's all in 2 chapters of the Bible. And then we catch glimpses of that. Same thing, but with some differences, and we're going to need to look at that too later. But we catch some glimpses of that same thing in what? The last 2 chapters of the Bible. Yeah, it's come back to that. So right away, what we learn about the mission of God is it's to get the first 2 chapters back. But when something bad happens, is everything like it was before? Ever? Or things like they were before the pandemic? That's one of the lessons that God is teaching us in this world, is that it'll never be the same. In Revelation 21 and 22, we can see the garden, we can see it, but it's so much more and better. And why is it so much more and better? Because of everything that happened from Genesis 3 to Revelation 20. Because of all that junk that happened in there. That's why it's so much better. You know? And God successfully brought it back that. And man, that just puts our lives into hyper purpose. You know, when we're in that story, we have a purpose and a calling and a vocation and a job and a role and a whatever you want to call it in this world when you put it in that kind of a story. So we just want to look at Genesis 1 and 2. I want to point out some things, some observations. If you see something, point it out. But we're trying to create a picture of just what this text says. I personally am under the viewpoint that not anything's left out, that God intended us to know, and that we need to know. It's a short text, and we've already talked about, remember that it's written in a different language, and by the way, it's written in a dead language that no one even knows for sure how to speak. Ancient Hebrew. I mean, modern Hebrew has a lot of connections to ancient Hebrew, but there's words and phrases and sounds that nobody knows. Because once the Israelites were exiled and scattered all over the place, you know, Hebrew kind of changed a little bit because it was influenced by Greek and it was influenced by all these other languages and everything. So we're doing our best here. But what is it, I've got there in the notes, what is it that Genesis 1 through 11 is telling us? Okay? And starting with verse 1 and 2. Because I think Genesis 1 through 11 is the introduction to the whole Bible story. But let's look at 1 and 2 because the most important part of that introduction is the creation story. So here we go. We're going to get as far as we can tonight, and next week we just want to spend as much time as we can. What are our observations? What do we see? What kind of vision did God have? Okay, and what is the flavor of this, and what does it tell? In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth, that's chapter 1:1, in case you didn't recognize it. I think everybody recognized that. The earth was wild and waste, is the actual wording in the Hebrew. Okay, you can hear, this is one of the most used phrases by Tim Mackey all through everything. The Hebrew is tohu vabohu. Tohu vabohu. Wild and waste. The earth was wild and waste. Darkness covered the face of the deep, while a wind from God swept over the face of the waters. This was something I heard this week that I had never heard before or noticed before. But Mackey says that, And I looked it up and looked at the Hebrew. The word in verse 2 for the deep, and then the word at the end of verse 2 for waters, is two different Hebrew words. Okay? So already, this is the kind of things we want to notice as we read this. Already in one sentence, the deep is the Hebrew word for chaotic craziness waters. Okay? It's out of control. It's wild and waste. Darkness covered it. And it's crazy, out of control, uninhabitable water. And the wind of God swept over the waters. Not that anymore. It's not that crazy, chaotic, nutso. Already the waters are starting to change. And what happened in between those two words? The Spirit of God came above it. Just the presence. This is the introduction that the Hebrew writers are trying to make.
Like the story we just got through watching in season 3.
Yeah.
8. Jesus walking on the water.
Yeah,
What's
Jesus.
going on?
Yeah, this is I was about to say that. Just came out on The Chosen. This is the first reference to Jesus walking on the water in the Bible. Think about it. This is what Jesus is communicating in the Gospels. I am this. I am this. This is present on this lake at this moment in this storm. This person, this God is present. And so, yeah, something very powerful. And you would expect for the Bible to open with something very powerful said, you know? Any good author is going to introduce the story, the character, and man, this is a bang of a sentence. The earth is wild and waste. It was watery. It was nothing. Already we can see it was just waste. The presence of God begins to calm even before anything happens. It was dark, and it says it was empty. There was nothing there. Okay? Then God said, what's he do first? Then let there be light. And there was light. And we're a little confused in our world in this story because it's 3 days later that the sun and moon appear, right? So like, where'd the light come from? You know?
God is light.
Thank you. Yeah, God's present. Whenever God walks, the way I used to teach this in my high school Bible classes is we'd have the lights turned off and I'd start saying the story. And then God said, whenever God's presence shows up, light happens. John says this a different way a little bit later, right? He says, God is light. In him is no darkness. So if there's darkness in the first sentence of the Bible and God shows up, can there be darkness anymore? There cannot be darkness anymore because in God there is no darkness. Were you about to say something, Greg?
Well, when you think about verse 1 and 2, God had to create it as chaos. So I think he's demonstrating that I bring order into chaos. So he could have just initially created it where the chaos didn't exist.
Right.
But at first he creates it that way and then demonstrates that I bring order into chaos.
Yes.
I mean, yeah, I bring the order out of chaos.
Yeah.
I am order.
Yeah.
And otherwise it doesn't exist.
Yeah. Great point. And Greg's point that he just made is the most important point to an ancient audience. Can this God bring order? Okay? Because that was the most important thing in the ancient mind. That is not the most important thing to creation in our minds. Our first questions in creation is, how did it happen? When did it happen? Is that, they didn't think about that at all. Their first thought was, where is order? Where is chaos? If there's chaos, then this God has no power. So it's the most important point to them. It's punctuating from the first sentence. Order. Yeah, absolutely. And you've got this rhythm through here, and God said, and God said, and God said. It's God speaking throughout. This is one of the things we notice here. God saw the light was good. God separated the light from the darkness. Now, one of the things we're going to find in this story is there's these dichotomies. There's light and darkness. Okay? In a little bit, there's going to be what? There's going to be water below, water above, and air in between. There's watery, wild, and waste, and then what? Dry land is going to be separated. There's land and sea. Okay? There's these things that are dichotomies, that are different from each other. And these, well, I'll say that in a minute. He saw that the light was good, separated the light from the darkness, made a boundary, made a division, called the light day and the darkness night. And there was evening and there was morning the first day. And for the rest of the Bible, there's going to be this imagery of light and dark in there, all through the whole Bible, and it's introduced here in the first. It must have an important role if it's taken from the first paragraph, that there is this light and there is this darkness. And in a few minutes, the image of God bearers are going to have to subdue the earth. And they're going to have to deal with light and dark because it's present and it marks times and it marks these things. But there's different. And by the way, before we move on, what is not present in Revelation 21? There is no night there.
God's glory is there.
Yeah, there is no night there. That's one thing, just keep in mind, that's going to go away. There was evening, there was morning the first day. God said, let there be a dome in the midst of the waters. Let it separate the waters from the waters. So basically, you've got this picture. Remember I told you that the ancients pictured this flat table, and it had a dome over it. Basically, they lived in a snow globe, In there, we would call it, they lived in a snow globe. And there was a dome that, they didn't know what it was made of, but it was in the air, and in between the dome and them was sky, was air, sky. And it's where the birds flew, and it's where mountains then were very important to the ancients. They built their temples on a mountain. If you kind of get the picture that for the rest of the Bible, that Eden is a mountain. Mountains were sacred spaces because they were up in the sky. So that means, were you closer to heaven? Were you closer to God's? You were closer to God's than somebody down here in the valley. Okay? And so mountains became so important. But basically, what this says doesn't have any scientific statement whatsoever. We know it's not, we wouldn't picture it this way. But he separated the waters. So now you've got water down here and you got water up here. And in between there's space. There's air, is what day 2 says. And so there's been a lot of people who've looked at that and said, well, that's the most ridiculous story. It can't be trusted. Don't even look at it. But if you're an ancient person reading this, you're going, that's how that came about. This God who brought order. Right now, he's taking everything that's present and he's making it more orderly. He's separating this from that, and this from that, and this from that in these first 3 days. Okay? And he called it good. Okay? He said, this is good. This is good. So the third day, he said, takes his attention. Verse 9, where does he take his attention? Down here to these waters below. And he separates this from that. Let's put waters here. Let's put land there. Land started coming out. Once again, he's bringing and shaping order. the wild and waste of verse 1 kind of has an indication of there's no shape to it. And now, if you just took a video of day 3, you can see some order, right? There's water up here and it's in its place. There's water down here and it's in its place. There's land coming out of the water. That's in its place. And everything's in its place. Everything is where it's supposed to be. But it's empty. There's nothing there on that. So what does he do on day 4, 5, and 6? He fills everything. And he fills it very orderly. What does he do first? He goes back to day 1, let there be light. And he put a sun and he put a moon to govern, it says in the text, to govern the light and the darkness. Somehow, before he did this, there was light and darkness, and it was unruled, except by him. He ruled it. He told the darkness when to come and the day when to come. And if we're telling this story like it's written, then for 3 days God said, light, come. Dark, go. Dark, come. Like, God's doing all this. He's the one directing everything. Now, one of the things that God does in his filling of this creation is he delegates responsibility. He puts the sun there and said, you're in charge of the day. That's how this story is being told. And moon, you're in charge of the night. There's this filling up and there's this delegating. And the land, and by the way, I skipped over, but the land didn't just appear and it was bare. What else happened on day 3? You had plants and things grow out of the ground. Okay, wild, because we're going to learn more about that in chapter 2. There's a difference between just wild vegetation and vegetation that's been placed and tilled and ordered for a purpose and a play. There's vegetation that just grows. Okay, and if you've been on a hike through the woods, you might have found some places like that where the vegetation is just out of control, crazy. But the land at the end of day 3 has life coming out of it. Okay? It's free from the water. It's free from the chaos of the water. And life begins to come from it. Okay? God saw that it was good. Then he put the lights in the sky to govern. On day 5, day 4, excuse me. And he saw that it was good. Day 5, now he goes back and does what he goes back to day 2. Let's return to day 2. On day 2, there was created this watery up here, down here, and this air. He said, let's put living beings in the water, and let's put living beings in the sky. And he filled the skies, and he filled the waters with every kind. Verse 20, let the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures. By the way, this word living creatures, nefesh kaya in the Hebrew, nefesh kaya, it is said of 3 different kinds of beings in Genesis 1 and 2. All the beasts of the animals of the land are called nefesh kaya. Birds and fish, nefesh kaya. Man and woman, nefesh kaya as well. Okay. So, what's our observation there? When the Hebrew says these 3 things, never calls plants nefesh kaya, never calls trees never nefesh kaya, but the animals on the land, the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, and human beings are nefesh kaya, living beings. We're creatures. What does that mean we are not? Gods. creators. I mean, we are in a sense. But in the sense of initial creation, we all are the same. We all, there's a mortality, the possibility of mortality about us, even in this creation. We're different from God. But then what does God do on day 6, by the way? He takes one of the Nefesh Kaya and he says, I'm going to do something different here, right? I'm going to take one of these living beings. And by the way, it's in chapter 2 that he calls a human a Nefesh Kaya. In chapter 1, he calls the birds, the fish, and the land animals Nefesh Kaya. Chapter 2, it's almost as he creates Adam. Genesis author reminds us, a Nefesh Kaya. He brings Adam out of the dust. Oh, he's a Nefesh Kaya. He's a Nefesh Kaya. He's just like them in that sense. Just like those birds up there. Just like we're creatures. Okay, we're created creatures with limitations and a possibility of mortality running around in us. Okay? If we don't get life from a certain place, right? And so on day 6, let's read what he says about humans on day 6. This is a continuation of day 6. Already, the animals have been created, land animals have been created. And by the way, they... here's one other thing real quick. The birds and the fish are blessed and told to be fruitful and multiply. Humans are blessed and told to be fruitful and multiply. Animals are not told to be blessed. They're not blessed and told to be fruitful and multiply. Think about that. Let's talk about that in a bit. But you'll never find the land animals be fruitful, multiply. Never says that. But it says it about the fish and the birds. Be blessed, be fruitful, and multiply. And so let's read what it says about humans. Then God said, let us make humankind in our, you heard Mackie say it on here, in our tselem. Let's make him in our tselem. It's the same word that you'll find if anytime you read the word idol in the rest of your Bible, in the rest of the Old Testament, same word, tselem. Let us make man in our own image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the air and over the cattle and all the wild animals of the earth and on every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. Okay, so first of all, he creates with in our image, okay, in our image, and somehow that image has to do with dominion. It's a ruling. God is ruler, and he is delegating authority to these image-bearing Nefesh Kaya. That he is not giving to land animals, birds, and fish. He's designated them to rule. Okay? This word rule is used through the Bible, and David ruled Jerusalem, and over and over and over again, same word. And they're in charge. These are delegated creatures. Humans are delegated creatures to be in charge of everything on the earth. To be in charge of everything. So, God created humankind in his image. In an image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. Okay? And by the way, he used the word them earlier. Let them have dominion. And then he says male and female, he created them. So who is he referring to? Let them have dominion. Male and female. Okay, male and female have dominion over this creation. And God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth. Then he says, subdue it. Okay? And this is, one of the most important words in there and often overlooked. there is an element of creation. There's still danger out there. There's still wild and waste out there. There's still chaos out there, which by implication means that God didn't finish the world on purpose. He didn't come with this perfectly finished, everything that could ever be imagined, thought, built, found, discovered, explored. It's all there in front of you. I've already done all the work for you. His intention in this paragraph was for human beings to take charge and, man, go out there and explore, and you will find amazing things to create yourself. You'll find ways of doing things that just will blow your mind, you know. And that's the picture here of Hebrew, of the Hebrew, is that creation is unfinished. Terence Freetham calls it continuing creation. That creation is meant to continue on. By day 7, everything's there that's needed in the earth, you know. And now it's for humans to go out and find it and wisely subdue it. Wisely say, nope, not this. Wisely say, you know, we could do this, but it may not be a good idea, you know. You know, we could take this and this and this, and we can make guns and bullets. But part of the wisdom of God is saying, let's take a minute. We've discovered how to do it. We've discovered how to make guns and bullets and all that. Let's, you know, machine guns and tanks and all this. We've discovered how to do it. Pat us on the back. Good job. The wisdom of God says, now wait a minute. Does that cause creation to be fruitful and multiply? Is that your whole job? Is just to find stuff and say, did it, found it? Are we on a scavenger hunt? We're not on a scavenger hunt. We're supposed to find it, come up against it, and it's an obstacle, or it's something there that's uncrackable, or it's something there that we can't get over, it's something there that's dangerous. We're supposed to take the wisdom of God and subdue it. No, that's not a good use for that. That's not, you know, one of the key topics in Genesis 4 through 11 is people discovered bronze and people discovered iron. And man, they did good things with that, right? But man, they did some horrible things with that. And it was because the tree of the knowledge of good and evil had been set loose on the world. We'll decide for ourselves what bronze and iron can do, you know. And those people have gold, and our bronze and iron can hit them in the head really hard and kill them. And we can take their gold for ourselves. That's the kind of thing, and that's the picture that's going on here. They're to have dominion, and they're to subdue. Fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, over every living creature. God said, see, I've given you every plant yielding seed that is upon the face of the earth, and every tree with seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food, and every beast of the earth, and to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the air, and to everything that creeps on the earth that has the breath of life, I have given green plants for food. So by the way, in God's vision and world, are people carnivores or vegetarians? In God's dream of a world. And please don't hear me saying if we're not vegetarians, we're not. We live in a broken and fallen world. We live in a broken and fallen world. But it was not God's intention to take the life of Nefesh Kaya. All Nefesh Kaya are sacred to God. All Nefesh Kaya have value and have life in them. And so one of the things we're going to see about this God of mission is, man, he is patient and he is generous in his provision and his allowance of the way his creation is used for the rest, because this was not his dream and not his vision. Okay? That all Nefesh Kaya are sacred and not their life is not to be taken at all. And You know, we live in a world today of practicality and economics and all of these things, and some nefesh kaya we take very seriously. We protect them like crazy. They even become almost like our family members, right? And it's abhorrent, and you go to jail because you killed this nefesh kaya, but then you sit down at your supper table and you eat a nefesh kaya, you know, another kind of nefesh kaya, and that's okay. That's all a big part of knowledge, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. We make our own decisions about what's important and not important. We make our own decisions about all those kinds of things. And we don't even realize that. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. I had nefesh kaya for dinner tonight. Okay? So I would have to go forward. Okay? If that was what this is saying. But this is presenting God's pristine dream and vision. Okay? And we can see from our experience that part of subduing and having dominion is that we work in partnership with other nefesh kaya throughout the centuries and throughout history. And we use them and they help us, and we help them in the best cases, and we abuse them in the worst cases, you know. But we were to be partners, and we were to work together in flourishing this creation and multiplying whatever is here and whatever we see and whatever's around us. And whatever, by the way, that God kept saying this word, whatever is good. Whatever is good, I want you to flourish. Whatever is good, I want you to multiply. Whatever is not good, I want you to subdue. You know. In chapter 2, verse 1, the earth and heavens were finished. God finished, and he rested on the seventh day. And he made that day a sacred day. He marked another time. Just like he marked and put in the sky a light darkness marker and a season marker, a day marker, a season marker, then he puts a rhythm marker in the world. A weekly rhythm marker that is to be observed. He makes it sacred. And this is not God sitting down and putting his feet up and, you know, now it's my day. You know, I'm finished. It's God coming. This is literally the sentence that God comes and lives with his creation. He rests in it. Okay? Just like we rest in a very comfortable chair or bed. We settle down into it and we're all in it. It's around us. God rests in this whole thing. He rests in this whole process. And it's finished. Now, in verse 4 says, this is the end of my story. These are the generations of the heavens and earth. And then the author says, now, let me get the camera zoomed in. Everybody take a second while I get the camera zoomed in. And he zooms into one point and one time in the story. And he basically, and chapter 2 is basically the creation of humanity. We're supposed to keep in mind they're the image of God. They're supposed to be fruitful and multiply and subdue the earth. But now he's going to go into detail, and let's watch this scene a little closer. Instead of just God saying in chapter 1, let us make mankind in our image, the author says, let's just watch this one. Let's watch. He doesn't zoom in on every day. He doesn't say, well, let's first zoom in over here. And God said, let there be light. And I've got it. He doesn't zoom in on that. I wish he would have. It would be awesome if we had to zoom in on every day. But we have a zoom in on day 6. Which, once again, what's our observation about why pick that one? About that. He didn't even zoom in on all of day 6. Kind of does, but there must be something important about these humans. Because they're the image of God. Yeah. And so that's what we're going to pick at next week. And look at and try to kind of say out loud a picture of this creation. It's got markers in it. It's got dichotomies, days and nights, and rest and not rest, and it's got filled up with nefesh kaya creatures, and one creature that has a different characteristic than any other creature, than any other Nefesh Kaya. And they appear to be in charge. That's what we learn in chapter 1. They'd appear to be delegates of the king and in charge. And they have both a very exciting job and a dangerous job, because they're still wild and waste, and there's still disorder, as Greg said, in this creation. And that's all we know right now. That's all we know. Any questions or comments? Yeah, so next week we're going to zoom in and listen in to this, listen in and watch in to this creation of these human beings and what God has in mind for them. What God's had in mind. All right, we're done. What? Yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah. Remember that much of what let me back that up. I don't even want to use the word much. I don't even know what word to put there. Remember that some, much, little, lot, whatever you want to put in there, of what we are seeing and experience every day is not this. It's not that we think about it. It's not this. But we've created a way to do things. And it's all what we're going to find out. It all comes down to we've made a decision how to do that. And in some cases, God has made provision. Before Genesis 11 over, God is going to tell Noah, what? Noah and his family. Okay, y'all can have animals to eat. So it changes in Genesis 8, but it's a provision that he makes. Yeah, and so then he tells the Israelites, only eat these certain kind of meats, and don't eat these certain kind of meats, and only eat the meat if the blood is all gone. And so there's these provisions that come up because of it. But each one of those is